Well, Michigan. And our boys enjoy the ball.
All right, everybody. Thank you for coming. We've got a great BIOS seminar today. Dr. Dave Bell is here, and I know a lot of you have probably attended another seminar he did and also read his work over the years. He's a national expert in a number of things, but this today is a little bit different in that we're talking. I'm not an expert, but this is really interesting. He studied a lot of things in the area of youth sport, with like overuse injuries, how to keep young bodies healthy, and it's been cited in like leading publications all around the country and all around the world in this stuff. This one's a little bit of a venture. Maybe you can tell us the story if I got to it. Sure. But it's going to be really interesting talking, very timely, talking about name, image, and likeness today. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, no, you're very welcome. Thanks for having me. You're always so nice, Pete. I don't think this will take too long, although I'm a professor, and you know when people say that, right? It's like, we've been here for an hour and a half now, right? I don't think this will take too long. I just have one study that we've recently done that I was talking to Pete about, and I think this would be a good topic to share with this group, right? And so we did a study recently about parent perceptions of name, image, and likeness in youth sport. Now, this is probably preaching to the choir a little bit. Like, I do have to say this, like everybody knows what name, image, and likeness is, right? We're good here, right? Figured with the news yesterday, perhaps name, image, and likeness is playing a bigger role in college sports. But we also know that whatever happens at college usually begins to filter down to the lower levels of sport. And this can make things kind of uncomfortable and kind of strange, right? I don't have any disclosures, but I do have a couple disclaimers. I literally put in here, like, I'm not an expert in NIL. But here's my lens, right? That I think maybe I can share this with you, and that might be helpful, right? Is that, so I do research in kids, in injuries, sports injuries primarily. And my lab does a lot of work with sports specialization. And so linking those two things together, but now it's kind of evolved into this kind of idea of the youth sport experience, right? And what that looks like. And so, was thinking about my work in specialization and my work and hearing a lot about NIL and thinking that these two things are, and probably have been on this collision course for a long time, right? And they are now quickly coming to a head. And so I'm of the opinion that probably this does not help sports specialization and kids specialize less, right? That probably is going to make kids specialize more. And so I was kind of interested within that context. Now, also from sports, I'm interested in it from like a public health burden, right? So I want everybody to play sports. I want people to be healthy. I want people to be happy, right? I want the obesity epidemic to go away, right? I would like people to have wonderful experiences with sports. But that might not be your lens, right? Maybe you're a coach and maybe you think that specialization is probably necessary for your kids to succeed in the sport, and their success in staying healthy is also associated with maybe longevity in your career, right? And your job security. So I get it that those two things are probably juxtaposed to each other, right? And it is what it is, right? But I think as long as we have our own lenses and we can kind of recognize that, we can have a good conversation about it, right? The other disclaimer, this area is evolving rapidly. In fact, when I just walked in here, I mean, the Chucky Hepburn news yesterday, maybe that's related, maybe not, right? The transactional component of these things is always interesting comments, right? But well, I guess maybe we'll find out, maybe we won't. And then literally I walk in here and Pete's like, well, did you hear the WIAA is meeting to talk about approving NIL and high school athletes? Like, no, I didn't. I've been up, Twitter for 24 hours, right? And then all of a sudden the news is breaking. So this stems from the 2021 case from the United States Supreme Court, right? That said college athletes can monetize or benefit from the name, image, and likeness. 33 states, the recent data that I have is from November 23, now allow high school athletes to monetize their NIL. And when we're talking about youth sports, it's really the parents that drive the bus here, right? That have a lot of say. They're the ones who have to advocate for their kids in a lot of these decisions. They're the ones trying to be kind of maybe the adult in the room to make sure that their child is being protected. And so this caught my eye like I guess this was probably the fall, right? Where a 9-year-old signs a 6-figure NIL deal with a sports agency. I believe this is for football, and I think it's Snoop Dogg's football team that he's affiliated with out in California, that one's associated with. But, we don't know how parents feel about NIL, at least within the context of youth sport. So this is from Open Doors, right? So this is where kind of shows you a map of like the NIL regulation. And I think the take-home point probably from today is what you're gonna see some definite trends in the data that we have, but I also think you're gonna see a lot of confusion in the data that we have about what NIL and what parents think actually NIL actually is. And so as I came in here, Pete was like, hey, did you hear about that? So I went and sniffed this and threw it in there. So WIA is meeting next week, the 24th, to vote on a new policy. Because as you can see here, Wisconsin is one of the only states that doesn't allow high school athletes to monetize their NIL. And in Wisconsin, this is regulated by WIAA. They're the kind of like the regulating body for this. And it's really different in every other state. But I think this is really interesting because, for example, a state like North Carolina, which is green, they had kind of a bifurcated system there for a little while. So if you went to a public school in North Carolina, the rules, the governing body that oversaw that side of the public schools, you could not monetize your NIL, right? But if you went to a private school, you could monetize your NIL. And now they kind of put those two together. And so now it's kind of like, they say, yes, you actually can monetize your NIL no matter where you're at or which school that you go to in North Carolina. Because you can imagine what would happen, right? Like if you're halfway decent at athletics and they think that might be a way to recruit, even though you can't recruit, they might pull them on over into the private school. So I don't know what's going to be involved with the NIL, but this is what the North Carolina law is. And according to Open Doors, again, not an NIL expert and definitely not a legal expert. So I don't know all the ins and outs of this. But here are the things within the North Carolina law that are considered like permissible conduct for NIL. And here's just some of the things that's considered prohibited conduct, right? So coaches can't use it for recruitment and enrollment. Coaches are not supposed to facilitate deals or act as agents. And they're like banned products, companies you can't do stuff with, right? But other than that, it's relatively, adult entertainment and alcohol, no, but NFTs, I guess so, right? That's the trading card of today, right? So maybe that's how it's going to work. So let's spend a few minutes here talking about just the methods, just a minute, right? So we have two objectives with the study. One, we want to describe what parent perceptions are. So for me, right, I go out into PubMed and I search for scientific articles that might be associated with NIL. There were none until just recently. One popped up, and it was from a medical group that basically said, NIL is something that's coming down the pipeline. Health providers need to be aware of it because it's something that could impact stress, anxiety, mental health, right? That could be something that's being now added on to kids' plates. The other thing that we did is we wanted to take a look at these demographic factors and see if we could kind of see what predicted how people would respond to some of these questions. I'll get more into that in a little bit. But this is an online survey, right? It's cross-sectional, meaning we just asked people once, like, about their opinion on this. And this was done last summer, all right? So just for timing's sake here. And we used a company called Prolific. And so Prolific, it's kind of like Mechanical Turk, right? It's kind of where you buy a panel of respondents that meet your inclusion and exclusion criteria, but it's supposedly a little bit better. But we developed this with a panel of our expert athletic trainers who were experts in youth sports. And we did some work to make sure that the questions that we actually were asking were relevant. And that's all that validity index score means. So what we ended up with was a national sample of 982 parents. They're about 41 years of age, mostly male, just a little, pretty half and half though. And they had children that were about 36% female. So again, mostly males in this particular sample. Our inclusion criteria was, hey, you need to have your child needs to have played organized sports in the previous 12 months. That was really all our inclusion criteria was. And I think this is interesting. We actually have a pretty good sample here for breakdown. We have all 50 states who responded to our particular survey. So this is a very like US centric thing. Like we didn't open it up to like Europeans or anything, right? So this was just in the United States. And you can see here that this is California was our largest state, so they had about 9% of the respondents for this particular survey. So we felt really pretty good about that. Some of the work we do is like, it's all Wisconsin, right? It's like 85% Wisconsin based. And we're like, that probably generalizes to the rest of the United States, but maybe not, right? At least that's what we like to tell ourselves. So, but it's also hard for sometimes us, if I send emails to people, it's like, in California, hey, could you complete this survey? They're like, I don't know who this person is, right? Wisconsin is a scam. I can't even find that on the map, right? So, all right, so here are the actual questions. So we asked parents, and we started with college athletes because we wanted kind of a foundation, right? Like, this is the one that they probably heard the most about in the news. How do they feel about it? And basically, they don't care, right? So you as a parent, do you support or oppose college athletes being able to monetize their NIL? And you can see here, 55% are strongly supporting, and we probably add these together, so, over 80% are, say, college athletes, they're adults, do whatever you want, right? So the next thing we said, well, what's your level of concern for college athletes monetizing their NIL? And again, they're not concerned about this at all, right? They're adults, go crazy. Make your own decisions. At least that's how I interpret it. Does everybody else feel this way? How would you answer this question? Anybody want to throw it out there? Anybody strongly opposed?
I do have a question for you though about
yes.
How do you think this would change if you didn't talk to parents? I think this is really interesting in the fact that they're neutral to positive for it, but I'd be really curious to know, what if you talk to people who might not have skin in the game in the future? Do you think these would change in some ways?
Probably. Oh, the other important thing here is that we did give people a definition and an example of what NIL actually would be, right? So, I think if we did that, I think it would probably be somewhat similar. I will say that for the most part, our kids are probably a little bit younger in this particular sample.
Yeah, I meant potentially, I think dollar signs in their eyes, for those future.
Both the examples here.
Yeah, so we would give them the actual definition of, the definition, I think, from Open Doors of what NIL is. So name, image, and likeness, was passed by the Supreme Court. It represents these kind of, or was associated with, right? Oh, maybe I don't have it up here. But things that you can do, I guess, with the North Carolina law, right? It allows someone to make money off their appearances or sign for autographs or, do product endorsement deals, right? That kind of stuff. Good question, though. Sorry, I forgot to put that in here. All right. So the next thing we did is we grouped people. So that was the old age, the college athletes, right? So now let's move down and let's talk about the younger kids first. So we had two groups of kids, and for our purposes, we just kind of grouped them into age ranges of elementary school age kids and middle school kids. So we asked the parents the same thing again. Do you support or oppose elementary and middle school kids monetizing their name, image, and likeness? And you can see here, we're basically shifting all the way over to the other side. So the black bars here represent middle school aged athletes, and the red would then represent elementary school aged athletes, right? So, maybe not as people strongly supporting, a lot more opposed, definitely a major shift to the left, but not quite as strong. And then we asked, how concerned are you about these athletes being able to monetize these things? You can see kind of a shift to the right. So we're opposed to it, and we're maybe somewhat concerned, right? Maybe not as strongly as other ones. Yeah.
The question that maybe is obvious, but so if you're currently a 10-year-old, who's holding you back? There's no governing body that can stop you from doing this right now, right?
Correct. Youth sports is the wild, wild west, right? You have high school and college are regulated through usually their state agencies or NCAA, whatever.
Say if you're a 10-year-old in Wisconsin and you monetize at 10, you're not messing with your high school eligibility, are you?
No, not from my understanding. Yeah, because there are different leagues have different rules, right? And there's usually nothing in any of those circumstances about NIL. Maybe as you get older, it might become more of an issue, right? Especially as you cross over into that high school age. But yeah, you know, and this has probably been happening to some degree for a long period of time, right? Like, you know, Baby Gronk existed before NIL was really a thing, right? But and he was able to monetize a lot of, look at his name, image, and likeness, right? So I think this is where it becomes kind of interesting, where we begin to see a lot of, you know, we're not swinging to one side or the other, right? So here we have asked about high school athletes. So again, parents, do you support or oppose high school athletes monetizing their NIL? And so you can see here that there's, you know, it's almost, you know, kind of 20% chunks kind of across the board here about how people feel about high school athletes doing that. Yeah.
Sorry if you said this already, but are the respondents in this survey simply identified as parents?
They're parents of kids who played organized sports in the previous 12 months.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
So they do have kids that play sports.
Yeah. And we'll get into some of their examples here in just a little bit, because I think that's where some of this really interesting stuff is. And so here we ask, well, how concerned are you about high school athletes monetizing their NIL? And again, you know, only about 12% or so are extremely concerned, and, you know, 25% are not concerned at all, right? So, so I thought this was probably our most, you know, if you just look at these survey findings, these are definitely the most interesting, where there seems to be a lot of, not disagreement, but just variety of opinion about high school level and NIL. So, you know, we brainstormed on this for a long time, but we said, okay, if you're concerned, what are you actually concerned about, right? So we put team chemistry, reputation of school teams, reputation of private club teams, right? Impacts on family, athletes' mental health, and athletes' privacy were the two most common things that parents identified as, those ranked 1 and 2, right, as the things that they were most concerned about as it regards to monetization of NIL. But we asked them to give a little bit more of an example here. And I will say, this is the really nice thing about this group with Prolific. Like, this group of respondents is very trained. Like, when you give them like a place to put something to respond, like a lot of people put stuff there, which isn't always the case when you're doing survey research. So we asked them, like, well, if we're missing something, tell us what we missed, right? And people had a wide variety of opinion. I mean, there's a ton up here, right? So integrity of the sport, you know, the athlete's legacy, right? Impact on athlete growth, just the controversy, getting caught up in making money, ethical concerns, being exploited by adults, you know, unfair compensation, just the financial focus of sports, fairness in recruiting, parents taking advantage of children, right? And pressuring athletes that they may not want to continue. This one, what came up over and over again, right? Sexualization of female athletes, like, you know, Libby Dune, for example, maybe would be an example of that. Consent, taxes, athlete health and safety, favoritism, right? On and on and on and on. And so I thought this was a pretty good list, even though I thought we caught some of these over here in terms of, like, we thought a lot of these maybe were kind of included here in athletes' privacy and mental health, but parents really wanted us to know that they thought of some other things as well, which I thought was really interesting. Anything jump out to you that in this that is particularly interesting, or that maybe you don't see that, you know, I'd love to know about?
What's interesting to me is, I bet if you ask the same level, is this around the middle school, or is which age group are these concerns associated to?
So we didn't say, we just said
Okay.
NIL and youth
I was
sports
going to say,
in general.
because if this is the youth sport list, this list, I would assume, or could say, is probably identical to the concerns in college.
Interesting.
Like, a lot of the things on that list were some of the things initially talked about when NIL was introduced in college.
Yeah. Makes sense. Yeah.
Did you get any differentiation by sport, or so your perceptions if you're a gymnastics parent, which again, you have this really early maturation of a young female gymnast, versus other sports that peak later, your window for monetizing, like as a young gymnast, maybe quicker and shorter than it would be for a distance athlete or something like that?
You know, that's a great point, Pete. And because we did this last summer, I have to go back and look to see if we asked what sport people were playing. We normally do that in our specialization surveys, right? But I'm not sure if that made it in here into this survey, but I think that would be a very good and interesting point, right? Like, what are there specific sports that are, you know, underrepresented, overrepresented here? Yeah.
So, to me, like taxes and financial focus kind of jump off the page and make me think of like labor laws and legality, I suppose. Like when you brought up elementary students, is it like a state by state basis for how young you can even be to make this money, or would parents need to co-sign? Is that anything you know, or?
Well, so I guess from a 10,000 foot, again, go back to my disclaimer, I'm not an expert in NIL and I am not a lawyer either. I mean, the kid can't sign things, right? Like, you know, the parent would have to sign as kind of, I'm assuming as the representative, you know, that's over 18, in that particular case. And so, but yeah, there would still be some liabilities, you know, for that. You know, and the other thing people have been particularly concerned about is just people getting taken advantage of in terms of like their contracts, right? Or people like signing their livelihood away for all of their sporting career, right? With a bad contract that they didn't understand when they signed it. And there are different groups that are trying to solve that issue from what I understand. I think like Philadelphia is a city who's like kind of offered some like free legal services to people who might be going through NIL to make sure that they don't sign a bad contract. Anybody know of any other ones that exist?
I was hoping to ask a question.
Oh, sure, go ahead. Yeah.
So media studies person. So
Okay.
I look at a lot of these things and I see concerns that like people would have about like child celebrity more broadly construed. So putting aside the college, maybe even their adults thing, but like when you hear people get like worried about child celebrity, it's for a lot of these similar reasons. So I'm wondering if like it might be helpful maybe to like try to control for that, to make sure that what the parents aren't reacting to is like these common concerns that people have about children making money, children doing work, children being celebrity, and how much of it is like actually NIL or sports focused or something. I'm wondering like how enmeshed all of those concerns would be.
Yeah, I imagine that Venn diagram of child celebrity and NIL are probably overlapping a lot.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But, you know, that's the nice thing about measuring perceptions is like it's people's perceptions and it's their lived experiences and however they take that in, right? And so we can't like discount it. We wouldn't be able to control for, it'd be hard to control for that, I guess.
Yeah, I guess I'm just saying conceptually it might be interesting for your purposes, like without judgment, but just like conceptually it'd be interesting to see like, well, what's driving this is actually like classic concerns about child or our labor and not maybe NIL, maybe not sports, you know.
Totally true. Yeah. Probably totally the same. Yeah, for the most part. Okay. So for these next few graphics, we ask people, so this is percent of respondents over here, right? And so now we have our three graphs. So now this is high school, middle school, and elementary school. And then these are basically each of the, how these groups responded. So we basically asked them, so is it appropriate or how appropriate is it, right, for kids to make over $10,000 for their name, image, and likeness? And you can see here that even in our high school aged athletes, about 50% of parents said that's not appropriate. And then you can see here, you know, these kind of numbers go up. And basically the middle school and the elementary school kind of mirror each other, right, for the most part. So, and to be totally honest, I'm presenting them in this order, but when they were in the survey, they were flipped. So we're actually starting from the highest monetary value and going down to the lowest. In the survey, we started with the lowest monetary value and went up to the highest. Okay, so that you're going to see some flipping kind of around here. So here we asked, well, what about expenses for a trip, right? And so actually, and we had these dollar values. We had 10,000 here, but basically we asked about 5,000, we asked about 1,000, we asked about over $200, I think, were the numbers that we asked. And so you can kind of see here that the lower the monetary value, the more appropriate it becomes, right? We asked about expenses for a trip, and you can see here that now for high school athletes, you know, maybe not that people are kind of flipping, right? They're saying maybe very too extremely. Still for elementary school athletes, most people are saying, no, that's not acceptable. A meal, right? You could see here a lot of disparity kind of in the responses here, but for the most part, you stay away from the elementary school aged athletes, right? But high school kids, yeah, sure, go eat at Chick-fil-A if they'll give you a free sandwich, I guess, right? a product or like a subscription or something like that. Right. So we'll see a lot of kids in social media who will say like, all right, hey, we're going to give you this lacrosse stick, or we're going to give you this piece of medical equipment, like the, the C collar, right? And you put it on your social media site and we'll call it good, right? As kind of a quid pro quo. And so, so you can see here how people feel about that. But again, generally stay away from the elementary school kids, but high school kids, no problem. Before we go on to the next one, we did try to be sneaky, right? And we tried to ask them, well, yeah, those were other people's kids. What if, is it appropriate for your kid to receive any of these things? And the parents were too smart for us. They pretty much answered exactly the same thing. But rubber meets the road, who knows, right? You know, $10,000 would be kind of nice, right? So we asked parents, what age is appropriate for a child to receive compensation for their name, image, and likeness? This is just all the respondents, right? So some people are like, yeah, 5-year-olds, don't care. You know, the two big ones, obviously, that stick out here are 16 and 18 years of age. That seems to be the ones. But even though you'll have, you know, high school kids can go, you know, all the way down to 14 years of age in some cases. Yeah.
Just a question for you. If a parent is okay with getting a meal, but not okay with $10, where's the border? I mean, you ask a question like, why does it make a difference if you're okay with one and not with the other?
So that is a fantastic question. And in this particular survey, we couldn't do that. We're going to do a follow-up survey where we're going to actually choose some parents to actually do a longer form interview with them. And that's actually what we're kind of interested in. But I think it's just this, from my sense, maybe being my own parent, is that it's just kind of like this arbitrary number that you probably have in your mind. And you think like, oh, okay, that seems reasonable. What were you going to say, though?
I'd say like, what do you get, like $10,000 for a meal?
Well, that was like one of the responses in there too of a parent. Where does it stop? I'm assuming that the parent just wrote like, where is that line?
I think, yeah, that's a great comment. Yeah.
I mean, if you're okay with 500, but not okay at 1,000.
Yeah, and it was interesting that when we tried to trick them, they were like, they didn't fall for it, right? They were like, no, that's not appropriate.
It's interesting that it wouldn't go the other way. Like, oh, my kid, you know, if it's this small thing, I'm gonna deal with it. But if this is large compensation, worth the time and effort, then I'm in.
That's what I thought too. So that's what I was thinking they would say, right? Like, well, it's my kid, and you know, that would really help them. I don't know. Sorry, more questions than answers in this. But dealing with human behavior is kind of like that, right? It's this complex.
It's also interesting because at a collective scale, you have AAU teams right now, and sponsored teams, everything paid for. You know, so like you said, pay for a trip. There are some go play for a certain AAU team, and everything was, you know,
yeah,
their participation and everything. So there's like interesting lack of clear divisions at individual and team levels as well.
Oh, totally. Yeah, Wild West, right?
Yeah. You have to sign paperwork for receiving that compensation? I don't know. I never got it.
hold on to that thought. We got some more stuff coming. So we did ask about how important it is to actually regulate monetization of NIL. And so, you know, people thought for the most part, what do we have kind of here, like 38 to maybe, you know, 55% thought that it was important to have some sort of regulation. And again, I think maybe think back to where when the survey was being taken and maybe how things are kind of moving forward. You know, it's very, I'd probably say it's still a little or a lot unclear to a lot of people who's responsible for regulating this. And you know, we asked who should regulate it, and nobody had a clear-cut answer, right? So we asked parents, how aware are you of your state's laws regarding youth athletes' ability to monetize their NIL? And basically, no one knows a lot of anything about their state's laws for NIL. And I think, you know, I was particularly interested in this question of, you know, how will monetization of NIL impact youth sports in the next 5 years? You know, and we just left it as impact, right? We didn't put any directionality on this in terms of like good or bad or anything like that. And so people were kind of maybe right in the middle. Maybe that's where they should be. They were like, yeah, it's probably going to do something, but maybe it won't affect my kid, right? Or maybe it won't affect me in my area. So we asked them a couple of different questions here. So do you know any young athletes who, we said under the age of 18 or in high school, right? We don't care about college ones, who have received compensation for their name, image, and likeness. And you can basically see here that only about 12% of people actually knew someone who received some sort of NIL. And when we asked, has your child received compensation for NIL? Only about 5% of their kids did. But here comes the confusing part, right? So we said, okay, if you said yes to this, are you willing to tell us a little bit about your NIL deal, right? Give us as much details as you want. It's an anonymous survey, right? So you can see here, kind of getting back to this conversation earlier, that there were, we kind of summarized this, right? Because these were a lot. So a lot of people, there was a lot of things that sounded exactly like NIL. I signed a contract, I received $5,000, right? Or my child received $5,000 for that. So there was a contract and some sort of exchange of money. And then you can see here, right, that there's a lot of confusion, right? So here, a local pizza place asked and gave a free pizza and scholarship in return for a group picture of the day of elementary school, and they had a day at the elementary school as mentors. It felt more like a sponsorship, but the kids saw it as NIL. Everybody was happy. Right? Is that NIL? I'm not a lawyer. It kind of sounds like NIL, right? And so maybe it is. In some of these, like a contract, we covered tuition, right? They receive shoes and money for good grades. That doesn't necessarily sound like NIL to me, right? Free meals from a local business. Yeah, sure, right? We signed a contract worth $5,000, an all expense paid trip to a town for a tournament, right? So I don't know. What do you guys think? Does it sound like NIL? Maybe. Some of them do, definitely. Some of them don't. Am I right in this estimation? Am I wrong? Happy to be told that I'm wrong, but anybody know any young kids that are receiving NIL deals?
Our son does. Well, he's a dancer. It's a little different because he's not in a high school sport.
Yeah.
In exchange for posting dance videos in clothing for this line, he gets free clothes every month.
Okay, yeah, that definitely sounds like it. Does you have to sign a contract for it?
Yeah, we have time.
Sign a contract, and you sign the contract, right? Did your son have to sign it as well?
I can't remember. I think so.
Okay, yeah. So that's answering a little bit of your signing question, right?
Pete, what's interesting for me, like as I sit here and think about Anthony, and I think about I don't know if he's an athlete, so forgive me if he's not.
Who's Anthony?
He's,
oh, okay.
He's really good at it.
He's a really good athlete, I thought that. But like I think about Danielle Hart, who couldn't put her name on her art until this stuff was passed. And I think about your son. I don't know what the high school rules are, but can he monetize? Can he have his name on his artwork and be monetized for that? Is that separate from his, like him as a high school athlete? I just don't know how that world intersects with high school.
Yeah, I never even thought of it. Hopefully, like the next week. We have to be in violation.
I mean, historically, right? People would have said like, I can't pay you for your athletic prowess, but I can pay you for your art skills. And I feel like that probably would have been a violation of some sort, right? That if it was caught, it would have been
I think she could still be paid. She just couldn't promote it with her actual name.
Oh, gotcha.
Is where the intersection of the actually using your name, image, or likeness.
Yeah, we're getting back to the days of, is a bagel without schmear a meal, or a bagel with schmear a meal, right? Because people broke the rules, and then the lawyers had to come up with definitions to figure out how to do it. You're right, yeah, we're going down the slippery slope. Okay, so the second thing that we did here, so that's kind of like the overarching study, right? That was like the descriptive stuff. So we did one more thing, right, where we wanted to figure out, like, were there demographic factors that predicted how people would answer the questions? And that's basically what we're going to be. So the take-home point here, right, is that African Americans are more likely to support high school athletes monetizing their NIL. I'll show you that in just a second. And fathers are more concerned about high school athlete NIL monetization. And again, we just said concerned, we didn't have directionality to it. But what the data basically goes to show is that they're concerned about it in probably ways of like might be interested in the kids making money and capitalizing off of it. Not concerned as like in a negative way, right? So these are the different groups. So here's the question, right? Do you support or oppose allowing high school athletes to make money using their NIL? And so these stats are just in these high school aged athletes. How do you feel about them? And the only thing that was really predictive here was that Black or African Americans were more likely to support high school athletes using their name, image, and likeness. All the other things that we have here. So you can see here, we looked at total household income, we looked at highest level of education, parent sex, child sex, and then we broke the kids' ages down into elementary school ages, their middle school and high school. So it was the age of the parent who was taking the survey, the age of their child, if that helps. So we figure if they had a younger child, maybe they haven't gotten to the craziness of youth sport, and so they maybe have a little less experience with it, right?
That's so interesting because several years ago, we were, in the midst of all the NIL stuff at the college level, the same variable was at play in surveys that Black or African American student athletes were way more in favor of it than other racial groups.
Yeah.
So it's consistent across developmental age, across ages.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess I don't know. I mean, maybe just this group is more supportive of, sports as a as a pathway to success, right?
At the college level, I mean, a lot was the highest rates of African American participation were in revenue producing sports, and football, basketball, the sports were making money.
Gotcha.
Yeah, just dumb question from a humanities, not data person. What does rep mean there? Like I was looking for the gender differences too, but what does it mean that it's rep there?
Yeah, so basically what happens with each of these is, so here's like a category, right, where the child sex is either male or female. And so one of these, based on the data, how the statistical program does it, it basically assigns one of those as the reference, and then the other one is higher. And so what you can see here is that these numbers actually mean very little, but the directionality means a lot. So basically what it means is that this positive sign is basically being shifted over towards the support side, and the negative would be more supported to be opposed. Or more concerned. No, yeah, it is right, support and oppose, right? So here, right, less than $25,000 a year, the reference is people who make more than $200,000, right? So everything else is then being compared to this reference value. And however the statistical program does it is how I am more than happy to do it. I'm not an expert in ordinal regressions by any means, but so I probably can't answer any harder questions. So here's the concern, like how concerned are you about the monetization of NIL by high school athletes? So here you can see that being male, right, puts us into the more concerned area, and having a high school diploma, a GED, or a 2-year college degree puts you in the less concerned area, is basically all you have to do to interpret that. And then having an elementary school aged athlete, sorry, this is going off the slide here, but the high school would then be referenced. And so this kind of supports us, right? If they had an elementary school aged athletes, they were less concerned. They were generally less answering those questions, and they're less concerned about monetization of NIL. Again, probably because they haven't really entered this area of the youth sport craziness, is at least my theory as it goes there. So this is our last slide. NIL, it's here to stay. The proverbial toothpaste is out of the tube, right? We're probably not going back. But like I said, I think parents have a pretty poor understanding of NIL, right? And again, the younger the child, the less concerned they are about, in the descriptive stuff, right? It's the younger the child, the more concerned, the more they don't like that, right? And then the ordinal results were in those high school athletes, and those changed a little bit. I think the high school stuff is really interesting though, at the end of the day. And I wasn't sure what direction this would actually go. but again, our next step, I think that's a great idea, Pete, is to maybe see if we can, even with 1,000 people, it might be hard to look at specific sports. But if we do have that, I think that would be a really interesting breakdown. But again, our next step is to kind of redo a little bit of the survey and ask some more like longer form interviewing of these folks to see how they, so we can get some maybe more richness in their answers and come up with some themes, kind of figure out what is the line, right? How do
I'm
you
fascinating how it intersects with your specialization work too. Like you mentioned at the beginning,
Yeah,
is this exert downward pressure and specialization?
I think it will. At least in some groups, right? Maybe not everybody, right? My children, I love them, but I don't think I have to worry about NIL anytime soon. And not for sports participation anyway, maybe for music, right, or something like that. But and then you probably don't have to worry about that for music, right? You know, they can still play in the band and get paid, right? So yeah, love to have any other thoughts. Thank you very much for a really good conversation. I really appreciate it. Definitely some things to think about as we kind of process this and try to write this up and everything. But any other comments you have are very welcome. Yeah.
I have a question. We know what really inspired the WIA. Is it just because other states are doing it, or is there? Okay,
I'm sorry. That is my opinion, right? Is that it is totally driven. So if we go back.
I didn't know if there was parent pressure, if it was.
Well, Pete, what were you saying with that one? That like 2 years ago when they took the survey, so they're a member-driven organization, right? Like 70% of their members were like, we don't need to do anything with this. And then when they retook the survey, 70% of our members were like, we need to change this. And I think it's because you can see here our surrounding counterparts are all green and allow for monetization of NIL. And so that's my take on it, is that they're going to have to move across state lines or something. And it's, you know, kind of this trend. Yeah. Well, that's all I have. But thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
I was laughing, if you're standing in the shower, right, and you're thinking about this talk and you have anything that please shoot me. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much.